There's something almost sacred about watching an elder at the dinner table, hands weathered by time, slicing meat with steady intention. But what happens when those same hands begin to betray them? Stiff, swollen, aching to the point where holding a fork feels like punishment? I remember meeting Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a retired literature professor in her late 70s. Her hands once danced across chalkboards and flipped through books faster than her students could follow. But by 72, arthritis had silenced that movement. Her morning routine transformed from poetry and tea to heating pads and pain relievers. Her grip weakened, her spirit dimmed. Until one day, quite unexpectedly, she found a new kind of relief on her plate. It wasn't a new drug. It wasn't a radical surgery. It was salmon, a simple grilled piece of fish served at her daughter's house in Portland. That night, she slept through without waking in pain. A week later, her fingers flexed more easily. A month in, she was writing again, letters mostly, about how food had become her unexpected therapy. This story isn't unique. In fact, thousands of elders around the world are quietly experiencing something similar. The profound power of eating the right kind of meat, not just for strength, but for joint relief, inflammation control, and mobility preservation. Today on Daily Elder Advice, we dive deep into 3 of the best meats every arthritis patient should consider. Not because they're trendy, but because they work, backed by science, reinforced by real lives, and tailored for those navigating aging bodies with grace, wisdom, and hope. You might think meat is just meat, but I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why a piece of salmon, a slice of chicken, or a serving of grass-fed beef might be the most healing medicine you've overlooked in your journey with arthritis. Stay with us until the very end. Not only will we break down the biological truth behind these meats, but we'll also explore how to prepare them for maximum benefit. Real stories from seniors who turn their health around, and a closing message about the surprising role of small food choices in building a joyful, mobile life after 60. Let's begin. First, salmon, the omega-3 powerhouse. There comes a point in life, somewhere around the age of 60, 70, maybe even later, when you start noticing the quiet betrayals of your own body. It's not sudden, it's not loud, it's in the little things. A jar you can't open anymore, a step that feels heavier than it did last month. That old ache in your knee, once occasional, now showing up every single morning without fail. And perhaps the worst part? The slow realization that this pain might not be going away. But what if, just what if, the answer to easing that pain wasn't in another pill bottle, but in your kitchen? Let's talk about salmon. Yes, the fish, that soft pink fillet you've seen at the grocery store and maybe walked past because it felt unfamiliar, too fancy, or simply not part of your routine. But hear me out. Salmon may be one of the most powerful allies you'll ever have in your fight against arthritis. See, when we talk about aging with dignity, we don't just mean staying alive, we mean staying mobile, independent, and pain-free. That's where omega-3 fatty acids come in. And salmon? It's one of the richest natural sources on Earth. These omega-3s, specifically EPA and DHA, don't just sit in your body doing nothing. They go to work. Quietly, persistently, they help lower the very molecules that cause inflammation. They calm your overactive immune responses. They reduce the swelling and discomfort in your joints. They don't mask the problem, they help heal it. Salmon also helps your joints glide more smoothly. Imagine your joints as gears inside an old clock. Without oil, they grind and wear down. But add the right kind of lubrication, and suddenly everything moves again. Fluidly, gracefully, as if time had turned back a little. And there's something else you might not know. Vitamin D. Salmon is full of it, and if you're over 60, chances are your body isn't making enough anymore. Vitamin D strengthens bones, supports the immune system, and helps protect against the very degeneration that arthritis accelerates. But here's the key. Not all salmon is created equal. When you can, choose wild-caught over farmed. Wild salmon contains more omega-3s, fewer contaminants, and a richer, more authentic flavor that speaks of deep oceans and clean waters. It's food with a story. And the best part? Salmon doesn't have to be complicated. Bake it with olive oil and lemon, grill it with a sprinkle of herbs, flake it into a salad, or mix it into a warm bowl of pasta. However you choose to enjoy it, you're not just feeding your body, you're soothing it. Start with 2 servings a week. That's all it takes to begin tipping the scales back in your favor. Because after all these years, haven't your joints earned a little kindness? And maybe that kindness begins, not with a prescription, but with a quiet dinner, a piece of fish, and the gentle hope that tomorrow might just feel a little better than today. If you liked what we shared in the first part, comment with the number 1 below. If you're still unsure or disagree, comment with the number 0 and tell us why. We're here to listen, and we'll do our best to give you thoughtful answers tailored to your situation. And before we move forward, let me gently remind you, if even one idea in this video has sparked a thought, eased a worry, or made you feel a little more seen, there's still so much more ahead. If this journey resonates with you, please take a moment to click the subscribe button. It means the world to us and helps this wisdom reach more hearts who truly need it. And I'd love to hear from you. What part of this message speaks to your own experience? Drop a comment below and let us learn from each other, because here, every voice matters. Second, chicken, the gentle builder of joint health. For many, chicken is a humble meat, simple, familiar, comforting. But beneath its mild flavor lies a quiet power that most people, especially seniors, overlook. If arthritis has made your joints feel fragile, swollen, or worn down, you need more than comfort. You need rebuilding. And chicken, when chosen and prepared with care, can help lay the bricks of that healing. Let's start with the foundation. Lean protein. Protein is not just for muscles. It's essential for repairing damaged tissues, including the cartilage in your joints. Cartilage is what cushions the bones, allowing smooth, painless movement. But with arthritis, this precious layer wears thin. Without enough protein, your body lacks the raw materials to slow this breakdown. Chicken provides high-quality protein, clean, easily digestible, and gentle on aging digestion. This makes it ideal for older adults whose stomachs can't handle heavier meats. But there's more. Certain parts of chicken, particularly thighs and cartilage-rich cuts, naturally contain glucosamine and chondroitin, the very compounds found in expensive joint supplements. These substances help rebuild cartilage, support joint lubrication, reduce pain and stiffness, improve range of motion, and unlike synthetic supplements, when you get them from food, they are more bioavailable. Your body absorbs and uses them more effectively. Chicken is also a source of B vitamins, especially B6 and B12, which are vital for reducing inflammation, supporting nerve health, and managing chronic pain. And let's not forget zinc, a mineral crucial for tissue regeneration and immune support. 2 pillars of arthritis management. When prepared properly, chicken doesn't just feed you, it begins to restore you. Imagine a pot of bone-in chicken simmered gently for hours, the broth rich with collagen and minerals. Each spoonful isn't just warm, it's therapeutic. It replenishes your joints, it soothes your gut, it brings energy back into tired, inflamed limbs. Or grilled chicken breast rubbed with turmeric and garlic. 2 natural anti-inflammatories that work with your body to ease pain. Paired with steamed greens and a drizzle of olive oil, this simple meal becomes part of your daily treatment plan. The key is to choose skinless, hormone-free, organic chicken when possible. Avoid deep-fried or overly processed forms. Those work against your healing. And here's something powerful to remember. Every time you choose chicken over processed meats or red meats high in saturated fat, you're choosing anti-inflammation over flare-ups. You're choosing movement over stiffness. Chicken isn't flashy, it doesn't demand attention, but it delivers exactly what arthritis patients need: nourishment, structure, and support, bite by bite. If you liked what we shared in the second part, comment with the number 2 below. If you're still unsure or disagree, comment with the number 0 and tell us why. We're here to listen, and we'll do our best to give you thoughtful answers tailored to your situation. Third, grass-fed beef, the strength behind the tenderness. Red meat often gets a bad name, especially in health circles. Too fatty, too inflammatory, too risky. And to be honest, those concerns aren't without reason, if we're talking about the wrong kind of meat. But here's the part that most people miss. Not all beef is built the same. And when it comes to healing your joints, the right beef can be both a comfort and a cure. Let's talk about grass-fed beef. This isn't your average supermarket steak. This is beef raised the way nature intended, on open pastures, grazing freely, nourished by grass and sun rather than grains and chemicals. And this difference in how the animal lives changes everything about the meat it gives us. Grass-fed beef is rich in a special kind of fat called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. Don't let the complicated name scare you. CLA is one of nature's most potent anti-inflammatory compounds. It's been studied for its ability to reduce joint pain, protect cartilage, and even support fat metabolism in older adults. It's like nature slipped a tiny bit of healing right into every tender bite. But the magic doesn't stop there. This type of beef is also high in zinc, a trace mineral that becomes even more important as we age. Zinc supports the immune system, helps repair damaged tissues, and keeps inflammation from spiraling out of control. And for seniors managing arthritis, every ounce of anti-inflammatory support counts. Even the fat profile is different. Grass-fed beef contains a better ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids, which helps shift your body into a more anti-inflammatory state, unlike conventional grain-fed beef, which often does the opposite. But let's move beyond the science for a moment, because beef isn't just about nutrients. It's about flavor, tradition, and strength. Food at its best is emotional. It reminds us of who we are, where we've been. And grass-fed beef, when treated with care, can be a celebration of both heritage and health. Here's a beautiful way to enjoy it. Choose a lean cut, like sirloin, tenderloin, or eye of round, and marinate it with garlic, olive oil, and lemon overnight. The next day, grill it until just done, slice it thin across the grain, and serve it with roasted vegetables and a spoonful of chimichurri sauce made from parsley, garlic, and a splash of vinegar. It's simple, elegant, and deeply nourishing. Or take a tougher cut, like a grass-fed chuck roast, and braise it low and slow with onions, carrots, and a pinch of thyme. After a few hours, what you get is a dish so tender, so comforting, that it feels like it could heal more than just your joints. It feels like a gift to your entire body. Of course, the key here is moderation. Unlike salmon or chicken, beef shouldn't be on your plate every day. But once or twice a week, it can become a powerful ally in your healing journey, especially when it's grass-fed. And yes, it may be more expensive, but think of it not as a splurge, but as an investment in your strength, your mobility, your independence. You don't need a giant steak. Just a few carefully chosen portions can provide the nutrients your joints so desperately need. In a world that tells older people to slow down, to accept the pain, to settle, this is one small act of rebellion. Choosing a food that reminds you of your power, of your roots, of your right to live not just longer, but better. So go ahead, fire up the skillet, slow simmer the stew, wrap your hands around a fork and feed yourself not just food, but hope. Because healing can start in the most unexpected places, even on a plate of beef. If you liked what we shared in the third part, comment with the number 3 below. If you're still unsure or disagree, comment with the number 0 and tell us why. We're here to listen, and we'll do our best to give you thoughtful answers tailored to your situation. Real life story, Mr. Harold's healing table. At 72, Harold Benson had resigned himself to the idea that pain was simply part of aging. A retired school principal from Minnesota, Harold had spent most of his life on his feet, lecturing, walking the halls, organizing community events. But after retirement, his body began pushing back. His knees ached constantly. His fingers stiffened each morning. Even lifting a coffee cup became a cautious task. Doctors confirmed it was arthritis. He tried medications, creams, even injections, but nothing brought lasting relief. That's when his daughter, an occupational therapist, asked him a question no doctor had ever bothered to ask. "Dad, what are you eating?" At first, he laughed it off. "Food? I've eaten the same way for 50 years. Bacon in the morning, processed meats and sandwiches. Lots of red meat, but mostly cheap cuts. Rarely fish. Vegetables only when his wife insisted." That's when everything changed. Together, they redesigned his plate. Out went the processed meats, the sugary marinades, the heavy dinners that left him bloated and tired. And in came 3 simple things. Wild-caught salmon, twice a week, grilled with lemon and dill. Skinless chicken thighs, slow-cooked in turmeric, garlic, and ginger. Grass-fed beef, no more than once or twice weekly, roasted gently with herbs, paired with greens. At first, he missed the old habits, but within 3 weeks, he noticed something. He could kneel in the garden without sharp pain. He stopped waking up 3 times a night from throbbing joints. By the 2nd month, he no longer needed his walking cane for short distances. By month 4, he was playing catch with his grandson again. He called it his healing table because everything that had been missing in his body wasn't found in a pill bottle, but on a dinner plate. Harold didn't just change his food, he changed his relationship with aging. He realized that nourishment wasn't just about staying alive, it was about staying able. And Harold's story is not an exception. It's a reminder that healing doesn't always begin in a hospital. It can begin at your dinner table. That change doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can start with what you put on your fork. And that after 60, 70, even 80, there is still room for strength, mobility, and joy. So as we close, I want you to think not just about the foods we've talked about, but about what they represent. Hope through nourishment, strength through intention, and healing through choice. Arthritis doesn't just take away your ability to move, it takes away the small joys that make life beautiful. Walking without fear, holding a loved one's hand without flinching, rising from a chair without bracing yourself first. But as we've seen, healing can begin in the most unexpected places, right on your plate. Salmon helps quiet the fires of inflammation that burn inside aging joints. Chicken gently rebuilds worn cartilage and provides the proteins your body needs to repair itself. Grass-fed beef strengthens your foundation with nutrients that reduce swelling, support immune health, and protect your joints from further damage. These are not just meals. They're medicine in its purest form. You don't need to change everything overnight. Start small. 2 servings of salmon a week, a warm bowl of turmeric chicken soup, a simple grilled steak, grass-fed and lovingly prepared. Each choice is a quiet act of healing. Each bite is a step toward taking your life back from the pain. You deserve more than just survival. You deserve strength, movement, and joy. So let your food be your ally, not your enemy. Let your meals remind you that even in later years, your body still listens, still responds, still wants to heal. And every time you choose wisely, you're sending a message that's more powerful than any prescription. I am not finished yet. I am still healing. I am still here. If this video spoke to you in any way, if it helped you understand your body a little better, or made you feel just a bit more hopeful about aging well, then I'd love for you to join this growing community. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone you care about. You never know who might need these words today. And most importantly, I want to hear from you. What part of this video resonated most with you? Leave a comment below. I read everyone, and your story might just inspire someone else. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of Daily Elder Advice. Until next time, stay well, stay wise, and sleep peacefully.